All right, everyone, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. I'm going to be using Book Creator to present today. So if you've used Book Creator, if you want to join in on be a little collaborative today, feel free to go ahead and click that link in the chat and log on in. But I'm glad you're here to share some time with me this evening on a Monday to talk about accessibility. Feel free, if you'd like, to put your camera on. And if at any time while I'm talking, you can also feel free to just jump in, interrupt me, ask a question with your microphone. Feel free. I don't mind that at all. And or jump on camera. All right, it is 7 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. Thanks so much for joining me this evening to learn a little bit more about how you can make your classroom more accessible. I'm going to be presenting this evening with Book Creator, and if you want to jump into Book Creator and go ahead and log on in, I'll be sharing a link soon for you to join this library so you can get a copy of this resource and also do some collaborative activity with me this evening, because you don't want to just sit here and listen to me for 45 minutes. I know there's two other really great sessions, I'm sure, happening at the same time that are about AI. So I know it's such a hot topic, but I'm really glad that you're spending this time today to learn about and talk about what you're doing in your classrooms to make them more accessible for all students. So I'm just going to get going. My name's Katie. I live right outside Washington, D.C. in Virginia. And I was a district STEM coach and a tech coach. And I'm a ISTE certified educator. So I work for ISTE and I lead the certification training for them. If I have any certified educators in here, hi. But one of my really big passions is accessibility. And that stems from my experience, my personal experience as a disabled person. And so I was born with cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic lung disease. And so through my whole childhood, did a lot of time in and out of hospitals. And so I've had a disabled person's experience my whole time through education. And so that's really informed my experience and made me want to help teachers do a better job at making their classroom spaces more accessible. And so when we think about the ISTE standards, because those are kind of our guiding light for integrating technology into our classrooms, we think about this standard that says we advocate for equitable access to educational technology, digital content, and learning opportunities to meet the diverse needs of all students. And I really am going to focus tonight on that digital content piece and the learning opportunities piece. It's not so much to get a computer in your hands. That's, of course, really important to get devices in students' hands and online access to students. But making sure that once they have that access and they have those access points to those technologies, that all the content that they receive and the experience that they receive is accessible, especially to those students with disabilities. So why is accessibility really important? Well, 7.7 million students receive services under IDEA. And so that's 13 to 15% of all students, pretty large percentage. And this is upward trending. So in the last couple of years, we've seen a trend upward from more students getting recognized to receive services. We like that because that means that more people are getting diagnosis that they need so that they can get the supports that they need as disabled people. And when we break down those students that are receiving services under IDEA, 32% of them have like a specific learning disability, while 19% of them have a speech or language impairment. So those are our two top. So if we can really think, if like that's our first like level of thinking, like how can we make language more accessible into our classroom? That's also going to benefit students like our English language learners. And so you'll see that I'll mention them in a minute as a part of the group of people that we can consider when we're making things more accessible. All right, get some more people popping in. Glad to see you. All right. And then I always like to add, that there is a disproportionate amount of students that are minority students, racial minorities, that receive services. So interesting as to why they're more diagnosed or and higher represented, but they are. And I think that's important that you understand that there's going to be a lot of people in our classrooms that have intersectional identities of being disabled and also being a minority that are going to impact not just their educational experience, but is highly impacting their medical experience because we know there's bias in those spaces too. So I always like to just mention that because as a disabled person, I like to highlight people in my community and understand that they face often more obstacles than I do as a white person in the disabled community. So just thinking any ways we can make the experience better for them and less barriers in our classroom is even better. And accessibility is important for our English language learners too. So it's not just those with disabilities. And there are 5 million students in our classrooms that are English language learners. And in some states, that's more than 10% of the population. And so everything that we do to help students with disabilities is going to help students that are English language learners. And ultimately, it helps every student in your classroom. So when we think about accessibility needs, these are our top ones that we think about. So we think about hearing, vision, mental health, mobility. So some students may have muscle or skeletal differences and may need to use different types of devices to navigate the internet. Language learners, again, not a disability, but I like to think of it as an accessibility need, and our neurodivergent students. So that could be our ADHD students, our autism students, our students with OCD, any student that's on that neurodiverse spectrum. We need to think about them when we're designing content and designing our classroom experience as well. All right, so think about that word design, and you're going to hear that word a lot from me today. And I'm really excited about, if you're not familiar with Universal Design for Learning, they came out with new revised standards this summer, and it was all around the idea of designing, that we as educators design these experiences for our students. And so when I think about designing and I think about designing online experiences, I really think about those people who are in UX and UI design. So that is user experience and user interface design when they work at a company that builds an app. And so I think we can take a lot of good lessons from them as practitioners of making engaging, interactive content online. We, as teachers, can take those kind of principles into our work in creating engaging, interactive, and accessible experiences in our classroom. So here's some of those considerations that UI and UX designers use and think about when they're making interactive experiences and apps online. So the first thing, and hopefully the first thing that they're thinking about, is accessibility. So we're going to talk about how when you create these digital experiences online, what accessibility considerations do you need to take into account? And this can be you making a digital worksheet. It still needs to be accessible. And so I'll talk about some ways that you can do that. Then we'll talk a little bit about the visual design and the interactive design and things that you can think about and take into account when you're designing those pieces of your online digital experience for students. Then every good UI or UX person, designer, always does their student research or their user research. And in our experience, in our cases, we're going to be learning about and understanding our students. So you can do this with surveys at the beginning of the year, asking your students for feedback on the accessibility of your classroom. Then we'll talk about some ways that you can enhance and make sure the engagement and the content in your classroom is accessible as well. So let's jump into the very first aspect, which is accessibility. And there are these standards called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, some people say. And there is an acronym, which is POUR. And those are, this is a really nice way to remember the big accessibility principles for creating digital content. Now, we as educators really have control over that first 3 letters, the P, the O, and the U. The last letter, that is really going to be up to our tech coordinator, tech director, chief of technology in your district. we're going to hope that those people are picking the most robust tools possible. But let's talk about what we can do in our classrooms for that P, the O, and the U. All right, so the P stands for the perceivable. And so when we're creating any digital content, it could be a Google document, it could be a video, whatever we're doing, we want to think and design that experience or that content with accessibility in mind. So what does that mean? The first thing it could be is alternative image for alternative text for your images. So you have an image on the page, like I have this one right here. This is the symbol for accessibility. If I want to add alternative text to it, I'm in a tool book creator right now. I can see that I've already added some alternative text to it. Really, though, this word accessibility isn't enough. I'm going to say accessibility symbol. So that's going to tell a user that is using a screen reader what that image is on the screen that they may not be able to perceive with vision, or some neurodivergent people use the alternative text to help them understand and process the reason the image is on the screen. So having good, robust alternative text is really important. And for a lot of tools, like if you're in your Google Doc, you could just right click on the image and you'll have an option that will say alternative text. The same in Microsoft documents. And then whenever you add a image to any web platform, maybe use Canvas LMS or Schoology, you should be able to add alternative text into that rich content editor as well. The next one is to hide links in the words related to their text. So you can see down here, I have some links in this text here. And instead of it saying HTTPS color.adobe.com, all you see on the screen is use of color. So that will help you as the user know where you're going. And that's really helpful to someone who's using a screen reader because it will tell them where they're going. You also don't want to hide it in words like here. So you don't want to put this click here. You don't want to type that on a page and put the link there. You want the link to be a descriptive words informing them where they are going. So do those descriptive words and then put the link in there. That is going to help not just your users using a screen reader, but again, your neurodivergent students and ultimately all students to know, hey, when I click this link, I know that I'm going to learn about using color. Or when I click this link, I'm going to go to a survey. The next thing is captions and transcripts. And so captions and transcripts are really important to give some language support. So if we think about our English language learner students who are watching a video, they're hearing it. They are giving that modality of listening, right? But we can also support that with accurate captions, and then they can do the listening and the reading at the same time, and that will help with their language acquisition. So that's a really great example of how captions or transcripts for those that are hearing impaired or deaf are going to support another student as well. A tool that I love personally for captions is Zip Caption. And if we weren't in a Zoom right now where captioning is built in, I would be using Zip Captions. This is a free website that you can live caption anything in your class. You can live caption your whole class. You could put this up on the screen. Right now it's not working because I'm using my mic for Zoom, but ideally, if I turn this on and I just put this up on my screen, it could live caption the speaking in my class. So I don't even need to have a Google slide going, or I don't need to have Microsoft PowerPoint Live going, which are also great captioning tools and I love. But if I just want to live caption the audio or the sound happening in my classroom, this is a great tool to pull up and use in my practice. So captions, anytime you can pull those in, you should. And hopefully you know that below in the Zoom, you can turn those captions on if you haven't already. The next thing is adding direct links for embedded materials. So a lot of times when I was working in Canvas LMS, I would love embedding content onto the page. And that was really helpful for my students because they would not have to open a new tab to go to the website. if I'm supporting those students with like some executive functioning needs and I don't want them to have 10 tabs open, it's really nice to be able to embed one website within my LMS, right? But then I have students that might be using screen readers, or maybe I have grandma or a cousin at home that's supporting my learner and they need to view the site to help my student at home with their homework. Um, I have to add a direct link above that embed so that someone can open it in a new tab. So making sure that if we do embed content, that we also provide a way for someone to open it in a new tab and view it directly so that they have a good online experience. This also really helps students using mobile devices because we know so many people go home and a mobile device may be the only device they have at home to use. Accessible tables, it's really important that you label your header rows and your header columns when you're making a table. You can do this in Word and you can do this in PowerPoint. And then the last two are really important because we love to make things beautiful and creative on our page. And we love to use a fun font and we love to use color. But it's really important that we use these in a meaningful way and a technically safe way. So when I talk about the use of color, one of my favorite sites is color.adobe.com. And this is a great site where you can go and do some you can explore some trends. You can explore color palettes that you might use. Let's see, here's some color palettes. If I'm trying to think of, I want to make a presentation and I don't know what colors, there's some trending palettes here that I can use and figure out. But what I love is here in, oh, I guess they've changed this a little bit. Okay, now it wants me to log in. That's not great, but we can do it. Okay. Maybe. Oh no, let's not do that. Okay. Let me just try and get here again. All right. So the accessibility tools. This is really nice. So we have a background color and we have a font color. And you'll notice that I get a little bad symbol here. That is telling me that the contrast ratio is not good. So I should not have this font color over this background color because it's not going to be legible and readable to someone who is low vision or blind. Many people that are legally blind can read and have some vision. So if I do have someone who's low vision, I want to make this contrast as high as possible so that they can view the information I'm sharing with them. And so here I could either lighten the background and you'll see that check goes to green. Or if I wanted to go back again, I could darken the font. Let's see if it goes. Yep. And that check will go to green. So we want to make sure that whenever we're using fonts over colored backgrounds, that we have a good aspect ratio. So you'll see in my presentation, I almost always stick to a black text on a white background because you're never going to go wrong with that combination. The other color piece that I love in Adobe is that I can check to see what it's going to look like for someone who's colorblind. So if I pick some colors across the color wheel, you're going to expect that, oh, this might be safe for someone who's colorblind. And this looks pretty good. All these different colors look very, very different. I can then just say, okay, this is a good color palette. But you can also see, let me try and move one. All right, here we go. So these are getting a little more, this one's gonna get, these two are kind of close. Yeah. You'll see that there can be shades, especially the greens and the reds, because people are often red-green colorblind, that if they have a specific type of color blindness, so it says possible conflicts found. It's going to tell me what is it going to look like for these different types of colorblind. So you can see that if you have this type or this type, that these colors are basically going to look the same, even though they're different shades. One's green and one's red. So checking for color blindness, color palette is important. This is really important if you're doing anything with directions based on color. That's just another thing to think about, is not using color as a direction, but especially if you're making diagrams that students need to label or graphs, checking to make sure that you're not using a color palette that different bars on the bar graph are going to look exactly the same to them. That's going to be really important. And lastly, readable fonts. Again, we love a fun font, but legibility is most important. And I personally love this font called Lexend, which is created for students with reading support needs. So that's a great one. You'll find it in Google Fonts. You'll find it in a lot. You'll find it in Canva. You'll find it in a lot of the tools available for you to use. I use this almost exclusively for my body font. And then I'll kind of use a more fun font for a header font. But again, be really careful about fonts. You know, you can get really fun. Let's get into some calligraphy style font. This can be a little harder. And we also think about our young readers who are learning letter shapes. So keeping our font simple and clean is going to be, again, better for all students. All right. Do I have any questions in the chat? All right. Our next one is O. Operable. We want to make sure that we are making sure that our interactive options are operable. We've put everything, all of our content is in an organized structure. Use the headings, so the H1 heading for our title and H2 for our subheadings and H3 for even headings under those. That again allows someone who's using a screen reader to quickly navigate the headings and scan the document just like we would with vision, scanning it with our eyes. Someone who uses a screen reader can quickly scan those headings to get to the part of the page that they want to dive more into. And then lastly, for operable, be mindful of GIFs. Use them sparingly when you use them. If it's great, if you have a way to make it so that the user can turn it off, that's a really nice feature. And then the U. Teachers are great at this already. So this is making things understandable. And so we're really good at using plain language, providing clear instructions, and putting things in a logical order. And if you really want to test things out, you can always use some AI to check your writing. So take your writing into an AI, either grammar checker like Grammarly or another generative AI large language model, and say, hey, can you clean this language up? Can you put this at a specific reading level? Can you write this best for English language learners? And it can help you rewrite your content, clarify it, and make sure it's the most understandable for all your students. And then that R, I already mentioned, that is where we really need our tech directors and, to pick the best, most robust tools. All right, so that was accessibility. Hopefully you have some ideas and ways to think about when you're making content to make it more accessible. I'm just going to pause if there's any questions. The next thing is visual design. So I talked a bit about color already and fonts, but we also want to think about layout when we're doing and making our visual design. So you can see throughout this presentation, I have a set of colors that I use. Those are my brand colors. So I set them up so every time I present, kind of like Steve Jobs wearing a turtleneck every day I present, I don't have to go to coloradobe.com to check to make sure my palette is accessible because I have these 5 colors that I'm using and for every presentation I do to make sure that visual design is cohesive. I know it's accessible and that it's going to work for my students, but still be engaging. Like the colors are still pretty. I can use textures to make some variation. So think about your fonts. Again, keep them simple. If you're also looking for more colors to use, I love this website called Coolers. And this is another really great color palette website. And they have this tool called the Palette Visualizer. So once you kind of pick your colors, you can kind of see what it will look like in different design experiences. So if you're making graphics or if you're making a web page might be more like what you do in your LMS. Or if you have a data dashboard of some sort. So you can see what your color palette would look like in a variety of different interactive online experiences, and that can help you narrow your palette down a little bit if you're thinking about how you are going to be using the colors. Because color is a really important tool in communication and visual design and making your digital content interesting and engaging to students. Because we do want to balance that accessibility piece with also making sure it's not vanilla and not fun designed and engaging for our students who do thrive and love visual design and get engaged by that, because we know that so many students in our class do. So if you kind of get a palette that you know is going to be accessible and you can kind of use that over and over and not have to check it every time, that's really nice. And then also thinking about layout when you're designing your digital experiences. Again, teachers are really good at this, organizing information and making the layout understandable and usable for our students. All right. Any questions about visual design, or does anyone have any tips to share? All right. So we're now going to be into interactive design. And this is really where we're going to dive a little bit into Universal Design for Learning, our 3.0 educator framework. So as I mentioned at the beginning, UDL got updated this summer. And in our framework, you'll now, if you were familiar with UDL and you haven't seen it in a little bit, you'll notice that some of these headings are changed. And this one, interaction, is now changed as well, because it used to be choice of action. And now we're talking about interaction. And this really is honoring our students who may have musculoskeletal differences and may not use a keyboard or may need to use an iPad or speech to text or use full speech navigation on their computer. And really making sure that when we're designing for those students. So we're thinking about those students who may navigate their computer differently, may use a screen reader to navigate, making sure that we are building our digital experience in a way that will work well for them. Additionally, and this is where it really falls into what I just talked about, optimizing for assistive technologies. So making sure that, students might use an alternative keyboard or they might use a different type of mouse. So not just making sure that that's available, but also honoring those options. So I always, as a tech coach at my school, I had that role for several years. I had several students who, we provided alternative technologies. We didn't give a mouse to every student, but we gave mice to specific students who in their IEP needed it. And so there may be kids, obviously, that don't have IEPs, and it'd be great to get some of these options for them who may just navigate better with these options. So just knowing that, thinking about interaction and how students are going to interact. Also, maybe if they're on their mobile device at home versus a laptop at school, thinking about how your students are going to interact with your content can be really important. All right, user research. Every UI and UX designer does this. They have focus groups, they do surveys, and that's what you can do as an educator in your classroom. You can do surveys at the beginning of the year, asking students, like, where do you want to sit in the room? What is going to be your best learning environment? You can do one-on-one interviews with them, because some students may not share on a survey. Also observing your classroom, or observing student. Maybe you have a concern about a specific student and the way they're using technology. Maybe if you can on your planning time or when they're in a small group setting, do some observations of them, thinking about how could I make this more accessible to them. You can do an accessibility audit, and I have a link to one here. So this is through Access Ed, which is promoting universal design for learning and higher ed experience. They have a nice spreadsheet that has a lot of checkpoints that you can do to do a classroom audit and making sure your classroom is as accessible as possible. So I love that resource. And then lastly, getting feedback from peers and specialists. Have your OT at your school come observe your classroom. Have your special ed teachers come observe, letting you know, hey, actually, I think you're really doing a good job on these parts of accessibility, but you might also want to try this. I think I'm an iron sharpens iron kind of girl, so I want to learn from people, and I'm glad to let them come and observe me and give me feedback. All right. The next part of the framework that we're going to dive into is the engagement piece. And that was the next part on the wheel, the UX and UI wheel. It's making sure that we are letting students come into the classroom and engage in multiple ways. So this first part of UDL is welcoming interests and identities. And a new part, oh, here we go. And a new aspect of that is not just welcoming their identities and giving them a lot of choice in what they're doing and the way they explore the information, but also making sure that we are addressing any biases and information that we are presenting in class and thinking about that. Also, we can help students become engaged in the learning process by giving them choice in how they share what they know. So over here in the action expression, letting our students choose the best way to tell us what they know in the ways that are most accessible for them. All right, so a great way to do that is with design thinking. And we're going to do a little bit of design thinking ourselves. So if you have not already logged into Book Creator, that's fine. I'm going to drop a link here so you can join my library. And if you've never been in Book Creator before, it's really nice. I am going to give you all a copy of this book that I was just using to present. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assign a book to everyone in the class. And so as you join my library and jump in, you're going to get your very own copy. And I would love for you to jump into, scrolling down to page 28. We're going to give you a chance to do a SWOT analysis, which is, if you've never done one, is thinking about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in your learning space that you might be able to improve in regards to accessibility. I started doing these accessibility SWOT analyses specifically in STEM spaces because I was a STEM coach and we were thinking about, hey, how can I use these robots with our students that are blind? And how can we make that experience like as exciting for these light up robots as it is for the students who can see the lights? And so we were thinking of a lot of ways to make those robots accessible. And I thought, wow, we could really take this idea of doing this SWOT analysis and carry it over to any classroom. So doing the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats, thinking about these things. So some things I would love for you to think about as you walk away today, and obviously we only have about 15 minutes left, but thinking about the strengths in your classroom. And on page 29, you can make some notes for yourself if you want. But what digital tools and platforms are already accessible to students, including those with disabilities? How are you designing your courses and putting a variety of representation? So we're talking about text and audio and video. Are you using a wide variety of things, or are you just keeping it to like reading this book or reading this website? Making sure we're providing the multiple means of representation to our students is really important. So those are just a couple of the strengths questions for you to think about. Then after we leave here today, you can think about where some areas that you could grow. So what kind of digital barriers are maybe in your class now that you could learn some more about to try and remove? Are there any representation gaps in the cultural representation of the content of your space? Because that is just as important. Is there flexibility in the assignments that you're giving or no flexibility? So those are some weakness questions to think about. So strengths and weaknesses are all the internal things, the things you inside your classroom really have control over. When we talk about opportunities and threats, those are external forces that maybe you can bring in to support or improve your classroom, or things from the outside that may be a threat to your classroom. So what opportunities outside your class do you have? Is there professional learning that you can take? For instance, this session. Are there people you can collaborate with? Are there students that you can get input from? Are there technologies that may be able to bring into your class that may improve the accessibility? And are there policies in your district that can support you getting access to things for your students? And then external things that may be a threat. Do you have very limited resources? Do you have a culture that's resistant to change and changing practices? Do you have outdated technology that may limit the accessibility that you can provide students? And every teacher is limited on time. We get, yes. So that is everyone's threat is time. The time to learn more, the time to make sure everything that you've been using for years is accessible. So don't try and do it all overnight would be my recommendation. Try a little bit at a time to improve the accessibility of your space. So after you kind of do that SWOT analysis, you can take some time if you want to do a how might we. And this is thinking about how you could go back into your learning space tomorrow and start to make it more accessible. If you've never done a how might we, it's part of design thinking. It's a really great protocol where you do pick an action and then a user and an outcome. So for instance, how might we make a classroom more accessible for a blind student so they feel like they belong? Um, Thinking about maybe a specific student in your class or a group of students, how might you, starting today, starting tomorrow, try and make your classroom more accessible to them? And then after you pick one of those statements, you can narrow it down to one, start doing more learning to try and support those students and learn what you're going to need to do to make your spaces more accessible for them. And so I'd love it if there's any questions. Also, oh, let me see, where is it? Yes. The very back, if you don't have access to Book Creator, there is a code at the very back of the book, and you can get 6 months free. So we welcome you to do that. Book Creator is a great accessible tool. And lastly, I'm going to make this book collaborative. So you'll see this in your library. If you want to give me some feedback today, you can jump in and you can do a little reflection. Otherwise, I'm going to leave the last 9 minutes that we have together for any questions or any sharing that you have for the rest of the room. Oh, Elizabeth, I'm glad you know Lexon. Yeah, thank you so much for joining this evening. I shared a lot of things, which is a high cognitive load. And we know that there's only so much people can take in once they reach that cognitive threshold. And so that's why I'm leaving some space tonight. That's another thing to keep in mind when you're working with your students, is there is a threshold for cognitive load. And so once your students have gotten there, they're going to tap out, and that's completely natural. So definitely try and ensure that you are chunking your information into bite-sized chunks, providing time for questions, providing wait time, which I didn't do as well tonight because like trying to make sure you fit in. Um, but yeah, chunking your information and understanding cognitive load. Oh, thank you, Brittany. Thanks for joining. Yes, we love our special education teachers. Yep. White background, white text is just the easiest way to go. And then make your borders more colorful. Thank you guys so much for joining. Janine, Jeannie, is there anything that they have to complete at the end of today?
No, just thank you, Katie, for sharing with us tonight. And
Yeah,
if there are no more questions, we can go ahead and end the session.
I hope you guys have a great night. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Elizabeth.